This is the Investor Connect podcast program. I'm Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of this show in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, family offices, private equity, and many other investors for early stage and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Eric Smith of AppBrilliance. Eric, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Hall. Thanks for the invitation.
So you were on the show a while back and it's been a few months since we last talked. So can you give us an update on AppBrilliance? Where's the company today and what's going on with the product?
Yeah, the last few months have really been a whirlwind. They culminated in us announcing on Friday the release. We did some press release announcing the availability of a new product line. So our company in general has focused on developer tools that make it easier to build next generation banking software. So the way our software works is it provides tool sets that allow banks to be productized, right? So it's an SDK that app developers can use, put inside their application, and then they can have a universal way that they can interact with banks for data. It's similar in some ways to Plaid or Yodlee or some of these other data aggregation tools, except it has some architectural advantages by running on the user's device. There's more security, and it opens up a set of real-time capabilities for not only real-time data, but also for ability to securely control these banks that users bring to the software that the SDK runs with. So that's what we've been doing for the last year or so. We've got some customer traction in a variety of segments there. But in the last few months, it's become very, very clear that there's an enormous pent-up demand for using our technology to move money. So on Friday, we did some press releases that announced the commercial availability of our money movement SDK for iOS and Android. So that's really been the lion's share of our focus in the last few weeks.
Well, great. So you work in the fintech space. What are some things people don't know about payments that you think would be surprising to them?
I think the surprising thing would be exactly how big of a cost sink payments are. One of the miraculous things to me about payments with debit cards and credit cards is that it sort of acts as an invisible tax on goods and services in the US. And most people are not even familiar with the fact that roughly 3% of what they buy ends up going to Visa and MasterCard and the payment processing companies for the purpose of processing that transaction. So the merchants that take debit and credit cards inevitably have to increase their prices to offset that cost. And so much over the last decade has been done to reduce and optimize the cost efficiencies and supply chains across the board around the globe for companies and how they operate their operations, to the point where the contribution cost of that 3% processing cost for goods and services is now just completely outsized. So for large companies like Amazon or Walmart, that 3% processing cost represents 30, 40% contribution to reduction of their net operating margins. So it's a staggeringly large opportunity for cost optimization and savings across the board if we could just come up with a new technology that allowed people to move money in real time and have the same sort of level of user convenience that debit and credit cards do. That's basically what we've done with our money movement SDK, is to create a set of technologies that can be easily integrated into mobile applications and provide a viable alternative that's more secure, faster, and at a much lower transactional cost than what people would normally do on Visa and MasterCard. So that's one thing. Second thing I think people would find very surprising about payments is one of the reasons those costs are so high, especially in non-traditional areas like crypto, is that consumers in the United States have very, very broad rights to dispute transactions. And that creates a lot of problems in markets like crypto or digital asset purchases in general, whether it's crypto-based or just downloading an app off the App Store. When users have the rights to receive goods, right, in real time, and then can later go back and dispute the purchase of those goods it leads to a tremendous amount of opportunities for abuse and fraud. Abuse, on one hand, where consumers can dispute the transaction and they can say they didn't do that even though they did. And then they end up with both the crypto asset or the Bitcoin they purchased, as well as the cash being refunded through a credit card or their debit or their checking account. And also for fraud, because if your information is stolen and put on the dark web, for example, people can take that information and provision Google Pay or Apple Pay accounts almost instantly, right? And use those to purchase digital assets. And so in the old days, people would steal people's credit card information or debit card information, and they would go to the mall and they would buy a computer or something and sell the computer at a deep discount. And so the time to do all these things and the number of touch points and risk for cyber criminals was much higher. Now they can go from a stolen identity to a liquid asset, right? Like purchasing Bitcoin or purchasing Ethereum, using those linked credentials. They can do that very, very quickly. And so that creates a lot of pressure on the system from people that process debit and credit card transactions for things like crypto exchanges and crypto projects. Puts a lot of pressure on them to make sure that those are legitimate transactions. And it creates this floor, this cost floor, that makes it very, very frictional for people the legitimate transactions to go through. So banks can choose to allow those transactions to go through based on the code of the vendor or the type of purchase that's happening. They can make those choices granularly. So while you might be able to use your Citibank debit card through Coinbase, for example, to purchase crypto, if that's something you want to invest in or use for payments, that same user may not be able to use Bank of America or may not be able to use Chase, for example. Or alternatively, all the users that use those systems may have to be paying 5% fees, right, for the privilege of purchasing or clearing those transactions because of the risk-adjusted premium that has to be placed. So in a lot of ways, there are these sort of things underneath the industry, these assumptions, these laws that are in place, these regulations that customers and consumers have not really had to understand, right? Because it's sort of baked into the price of goods and services generally. But there's now opportunities for removing those costs and frictions from the system in a way that I think is going to potentially lead to better competition, lower prices in the macro economy, the real economy, as well as create a whole new class of services and lower the friction for consumers to participate in the next generation sort of crypto or crypto asset or crypto transaction economy that's out there by allowing people to go from their US dollars or their euros or whatever into those assets and back as quickly and seamlessly as possible. So those are two sort of big picture things that have to do with payments that I think are generally not widely known.
Great. Well, there's a lot of new technologies that foster innovation, but then you have regulatory, which holds it back, and in some cases for good reasons, in other cases just for historic reasons. How much do you think the regulatory is going to change in the next 5 years to let more innovations come through versus hold it back?
Well, U.S. regulators have been pretty clear that they're taking a market-based approach for innovation in the tech space as it intersects banking and technology. Some of our competitors like Plaid and Yodlee and MX and Finicity, these are other venture-backed companies or publicly traded companies that are out there that have been providing sort of tech-augmented services. Most recently, Plaid was purchased by Visa for $5.3 billion just a month or two ago. And so there's a robust market and demand for these tech-augmented services. And so in the US, the regulatory environment is very much in keeping with our way of doing things is pretty laissez-faire. So tech companies are stepping up and innovating on top of the services that are provided by banks. I think what I'm seeing, and I think will be a trend that will be more clear over the next 6 to 12 months, is that banks are starting to push back a little bit. And this lack of clear regulation in the space has created some opportunities for banks to come back and to make it less easy for consumers to access these tech augmented services. And so the way that's happening is banks are being more aggressive in disallowing those interconnects from folks like Plaid or Yodel or Finicity. And they're doing that under the guise of consumer account security. Because one of the things that differentiates us from other companies out there is that the traditional way of doing this is, if you're using Plaid or Finicity or Yodel, et cetera, is your credentials go up to some servers in the cloud. And then those servers in the cloud use those credentials with an integration with the bank, which is typically an external integration, screen scraping, et cetera. And the bank responds to those connections in a way that generally allows them for low risk transactions. But if they try to do anything else, they'll respond to those with a pushback. Basically, it's almost like an immune system response. And the bank comes back to that Yodel connection, for example, and says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I need you to prove to me that you're the user," right? So they hit them with an MFA, multi-factor authentication request, or they hit them with a 2FA or two-factor authentication request. And that then turns around and breaks the connection. So what we're seeing is more and more these applications that require or sort of rely on those infrastructure providers to provide services for account aggregation services are becoming more and more unreliable, because banks are pushing back against those integrations and creating more and more fragility into those systems and those interconnects. And I'm seeing an acceleration, a radical acceleration over the last 6 months of that. And so I think what that does in general, I think that's not good for the consumer, but that is actually good for us as a company, because our technology does not suffer from the same integration challenges. So if a bank is interacting with us using our technology and then challenges that connection with a 2FA or an MFA challenge, our technology seamlessly works with that, because it's running on the user's device within a trusted application, almost in a whitelisted capacity. So if there's ever anything that the bank pushes back against that integration and says, prove to me this is the user, our technology can do that seamlessly. And so on one hand, there's this sort of macro trend, which is sort of going to be challenging in the industry. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that's something that plays in our favor. But in the broader context, it's something that could benefit for some regulatory guidance in the US, that application innovation needs to get faster and better and not be something which is limited by these sort of attempts to maintain the status quo.
Great. Well, it's glad to see things moving forward, although it's always 3 steps forward, 2 steps backwards. It sounds like it's still more room to go as well, but it sounds like it's going in the right direction in some ways with technologies such as yours. You recently raised a round of funding. Can you tell us how the raise went?
It went really well. In the challenging macroeconomic environment we have right now, in this moment we're in March, April of 2020, I can't really draw any specific trends from what happened with our round. We're in a very hot space with a very strong product offering with a lot of customer traction. So things went well for us. There was a higher demand for our funding offering than we had allocated, which is then driving additional demand for a follow-on financing and equity financing as quickly as possible. But there's a lot of externalities that are sort of driving that for us. I think in general, we're going into a more challenging environment where entrepreneurs need to focus on customers and revenue above all else. And that's really no different than we've always done. We've always been very focused on innovation and driving customer revenue and customer engagement. And we will continue to be focused like that. But we were very successful in getting this round closed. We're very happy about it. And we're just focused on using the proceeds from that to drive scale at the company as close as we can. Because our overarching goal is to get this infrastructure and technology out there in the hands of companies that can use this to radically reduce that $120 billion cost for payment processing that they pay annually in the US. We think there's an enormous opportunity to reduce that cost and increase the operational efficiencies and margins for companies across the board. And so that's our number one focus and sort of what we're using the proceeds for. And so for us, it's a really exciting time going into an economic expansion or into an economic contraction event. people are focused on revenue, they're focused on efficiency. So we see a lot of greenfield space out there. And to the degree that other Austin companies are really focused on those kind of key enabling technologies that sort of will find a market for use even in challenging times, then I'm looking forward to that, right? In my career, there's been a lot of externalities that have happened in my career, whether there's the dot-com bubble or the financial crisis of 2008. And it's easy to be an entrepreneur when all the boats are floating. It's always more challenging to do it in a difficult operating environment. And so we're excited for the future. We think we will get through this, and so will many other companies. But so far, knock on wood, it has not dramatically impacted our business. And hopefully we can continue that momentum going into 2020.
So what's your advice for others raising funding? What would you tell them to do before they launch out onto that fundraising trail?
It's always a real challenge to raise funding in a down market. I think it's the biggest thing that people need to focus on is just getting customers and differentiating their product from their competition in a way that's defensible. And the interesting thing in these kind of markets is that it creates pain, and pain creates opportunity. So as difficult as it can be to operate in a cash-constrained environment, there are going to be very large customers out there that are experiencing a tremendous amount of pain. And money is not going away, right? So customers still need to buy stuff. They still need to make payments. They still need to get to work. There's a lot of real-world problems that need to be solved. And what's changed is that the status quo is no longer good enough, right? So there's going to be companies that are facing increased pressure from their investors, increased pressure from the market, from macroeconomic circumstances, and they're going to look for cost cutting. They're going to look for efficiencies, technological efficiencies. And that's what great entrepreneurs do. They find opportunities, they identify those opportunities, and they find those fits and those gaps in the market. And so overall, I think some of the best companies and the most productive of companies and long-term, some of those successful companies are born and grow in these kind of challenging environments. So again, my feedback or my advice to somebody would be find those greenfield areas that people are not really paying attention to or don't pay that much attention to in the best of times, and find where those pain points are and drive innovation and cost savings and revenue opportunities for the customers in those segments. And that will then in turn create a very, very powerful customer base and powerful opportunity to drive your company's valuation forward as the market in general recovers.
Well, great. So you talked about the new SDK coming out, but what's the next step for AppBrilliance? What are you guys going to be doing next?
Well, so it's really focusing on customer deployments, getting that SDK in as many customers' hands as possible across a variety of market segments. So we've got a lot of activity going on in payments and partnership opportunities in payments, both from companies that have tens of millions or hundreds of millions of consumers that have apps on phones that can integrate our SDK and reduce their purchase processing cost. So that's whether it's purchasing food or whether it's buying stuff at the local warehouse store or grocery store. There's a lot of brick and mortar opportunities that intercept payments that there's companies out there that we're looking to partner with on our SDK. There's also payment network opportunities there where we can work with companies to provide a broader market implementation that'll work for more traditional brick and mortar companies that don't have large numbers of users that have digital engagement with their mobile applications. So there's sort of one-to-many payment opportunities that we're evaluating with different channel partnerships from major companies. And then our technology can also be used, as we've talked about previously, our technology can be used in the crypto space. And even though the crypto market has taken a significant hit in the last 90 days or so, there's still a substantial opportunity on a global scale for demand for crypto as an alternative investment class or as an alternative payment technology. So we have customer activities across that spectrum of companies, and we're just really excited to work with large customers in those spaces that have, again, tens of millions of consumers that use their apps, and really dig in with those companies to get this SDK installed and deployed as a sort of critical alternative piece of infrastructure going forward. So that's mainly where we're going to be focused on in 2020, showing those values and driving that value to customers and showing that this is a scalable, viable alternative rail for payment processing in the 21st century.
Great. Well, there are many great things to like about AppBrilliance. If you had to pick the most exciting part to you, what would that be?
Oh, wow. That's a broad question. As an entrepreneur, being involved in a company with really great people is always the most gratifying thing, right? To be able to look forward to going to work and solving big problems and working with really, really smart people. And so I feel like we're blessed in having an amazing founding team and an amazing group of employees in our small company and an amazing set of customers and investors that we work with and engage with on a daily basis. And so that keeps me motivated. And what makes me most excited is that, we're all kind of on the same team, rowing in the same direction, trying to go after this, one of the last great undisrupted markets, right? That $120 billion a year payment processing market in the US is one of the great undisrupted spaces. And the most exciting thing for me, right, is being able to get up every day and go tilt at that windmill and have a realistic opportunity to make a dent in that universe, I think is the most exciting thing, and why I think folks at AppBrilliance are super motivated to work here and keep making progress in that space. There are a lot of companies out there that are doing a lot of different things, and we're not curing cancer, right? We're not building quantum computers or time machines. But from a basic blocking and tackling perspective, the technology that we're putting into place and the kind of customer opportunities that we are focused on can make a real difference and move the needle on company profits and reducing costs at a really critical juncture in the economy. And so that's super exciting for us, and we're focused on doing that. And yeah, that's super, super validating for us.
It sounds like it's going very well. In the last few minutes that we have here today, what else should we cover that we haven't?
I feel like I spoke about 15,000 words, so I'm kind of out of words. But I would like to thank you and 10 in general for the services that they provide to the Austin community, the entrepreneur community in this space. And I know you're more than Austin. I know you have a nationwide presence now, but you guys have done a lot to facilitate us and help us, not just from a fundraising perspective, but from a sounding board and services perspective, as sort of a one-stop shop that we can go to help us solve problems and to help connect with not just, again, investors, but also potential customers or people that are familiar with folks in my space as a sounding board. And that's been very, very valuable to us. And I really, want to applaud you and your team and all the hard work that you guys do, and appreciate the opportunity you provide us to participate in this forum with you guys, and look forward to continue to work with you through this year and on into the future.
Great. We appreciate the kind words and enjoyed working with you as well. And glad to see you're moving on to the next level, next stage of your business life there with AppBrilliance. And let's stay in touch and see how things go with the next stage. I'm sure it'll be as fun as it was in the last one. I want to thank you for joining us today. How best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
You can email me at Eric, ERIC, at AppBrilliance, BRILLIANCE.com. Or you can go to our website and reach out to us that way. We would love to connect with anyone out there that's doing something interesting in the payment space and feels like they could use our SDK to save themselves or their customers a bunch of money.
Great. We'll put that in the show notes. I want to thank you for joining us today and hope to have you back for a follow-up in the near future.
Excellent. Hall, thank you very much and have a great week.
You as well.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org.
Hall T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for the basis of investment decisions.